In 1816, the sun rose, but it did not warm the earth. It hung in the sky like a pale, exhausted ghost. Snow fell in June. Harvests failed across continents. Bread prices exploded. Riots broke out in market squares that had stood peacefully for centuries. And, in Switzerland, a group of writers trapped indoors by relentless storms began telling ghost stories, one of which would become Frankenstein. This was not random weather. It was not superstition. It was not divine wrath. It was the delayed shockwave of the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded human history. This was the year the world went dark. In April 1815, on the Indonesian island of Sumbawa, Mount Tambora began to rumble. For days, distant thunder echoed across the sea. Villagers believed it was cannon fire. Some thought a naval battle had erupted beyond the horizon. They were wrong. On April 10th, Tambora tore itself apart. The explosion was so violent it could be heard nearly 2,000 kilometers away. The sound reached as far as Sumatra. Shockwaves circled the globe. The mountain, once over 4,300 meters tall, lost more than a kilometer of its height in a matter of hours. Entire villages were erased instantly beneath pyroclastic flows, avalanches of superheated ash and gas moving faster than a hurricane. Forests ignited, shorelines collapsed, tsunamis struck neighboring islands. An estimated 10,000 people died immediately, but the eruption was not finished. Tambora blasted roughly 160 cubic kilometers of ash and debris into the sky. More critically, it injected massive quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, high enough that rain could not simply wash it away. Up there, beyond ordinary weather, the gas transformed into a fine veil of sulfate aerosols, a planetary sunshade, invisible at first, silent, drifting. Over the following months, that veil spread around the globe. It reflected sunlight back into space. It reduced the energy reaching the surface of the Earth. Global temperatures dropped by an average of 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius. That number sounds small. It is not. A fraction of a degree sustained across an entire planet can unravel harvest cycles, monsoons, and ocean currents. It can shorten growing seasons by weeks. It can turn marginal farmland into famine. By the spring of 1816, the consequences began to surface. In New England, farmers watched in disbelief as frost returned in June. On June 6th, snow fell across parts of Massachusetts. In July, cold snaps killed cornfields. In August, ice formed on ponds. Families who had survived the American Revolution now faced something more insidious, a summer that never arrived. Crops were replanted and replanted again. 3 times they failed. Livestock starved. Hay could not grow properly. Oats withered. Grain yields collapsed. Church records from the time speak of despair, of prayers for warmth, of sermons interpreting the cold as judgment. Thousands of families abandoned their farms and began migrating westward into Ohio and Indiana, accelerating American expansion into the Midwest. A volcanic eruption in Indonesia was quietly reshaping the demographic map of the United States. Across the Atlantic, Europe fared no better. The continent was already fragile. The Napoleonic Wars had just ended in 1815. Economies were exhausted. Soldiers were returning home to scarce jobs. Political tensions simmered beneath the surface. Then the rains began, relentless, punishing rain. In Ireland, wheat and potato crops rotted in soaked soil. In Germany, grain harvests plummeted. In Switzerland, cattle starved in alpine pastures. Bread prices doubled, then tripled. Food became currency. In parts of France and Britain, riots erupted as hungry crowds stormed markets and grain warehouses. In some towns, authorities deployed troops to guard bakeries. For many ordinary people, it felt apocalyptic. Diaries from 1816 described dim, reddish sunlight, strange, lingering mists, unseasonal storms. Some believed the sun itself was dying. And while Europe and North America struggled, Asia faced its own catastrophe. Disturbed monsoon patterns disrupted agriculture across India and China. Food shortages intensified. In Bengal, abnormal climate conditions contributed to the spread of cholera, a disease that would soon begin its deadly global march. Tambora did not simply cause a bad year, it destabilized interconnected systems: food, trade, labor, health. Civilization rests on agricultural predictability. Remove that, even briefly, and everything trembles. And yet, amid the darkness, something unexpected emerged. In the summer of 1816, near Lake Geneva, the weather refused to cooperate with leisure. Storms rolled constantly across the lake. Cold winds lashed the shoreline. Rain kept travelers indoors. Among those stranded were Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and a young woman named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. Confined by the bleak, unnatural summer, they entertained themselves by reading German ghost stories. Eventually, Byron proposed a challenge. Each person would write their own tale of horror. Mary, only 18 years old, began imagining a scientist who dared to create life and unleashed something he could not control. She later described a waking dream, a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had assembled. Frankenstein was born in a year without warmth. The novel's themes, isolation, unnatural creation, the terrifying power of forces beyond human control, echo the atmosphere of that summer. A world out of balance, nature behaving strangely, humanity humbled. Even painters may have been influenced. Artists like J.M.W. Turner began depicting unusually vivid sunsets, deep reds and blazing oranges that some scientists believe were intensified by volcanic aerosols scattering light in the atmosphere. Tambora altered not only harvests and economies, it may have subtly colored the art of an entire generation. Here is the most unsettling truth. In 1816, no one understood the cause. The eruption had occurred in April 1815, thousands of miles away from Europe and America. News traveled slowly. There was no global scientific network, no satellite imagery, no atmospheric chemistry. People experienced a worldwide climate anomaly without knowing why. Imagine living through that. The sun dims, crops fail, famine spreads, and there is no explanation. Today, we analyze ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica and see the sulfate spike from Tambora embedded like a scar in the geological record. We reconstruct temperature drops using tree rings. We simulate aerosol dispersal using climate models. But in 1816, the sky simply looked wrong, and that uncertainty amplified the fear. Tambora remains the largest eruption in recorded history in terms of material ejected, but it is not unique in Earth's deeper past. Far larger eruptions have occurred, some linked to mass extinctions millions of years ago. The year without a summer is a reminder that civilization exists within geological time, not above it. We often imagine progress as a straight line, technology advancing, society stabilizing, knowledge accumulating. But the Earth does not move in straight lines. It pulses, it shifts, it erupts. A single mountain on a remote island reduced global temperatures, triggered famines, accelerated migration, fueled riots, contributed to disease outbreaks, and shaped literature and art, all within the span of a year. And perhaps the most sobering lesson is how thin the margin truly is. Modern agriculture still depends on predictable growing seasons. Global supply chains still rely on stable climate patterns. Even today, a sufficiently large eruption could cool the planet temporarily, disrupt food production, and strain political systems. The difference is that now we would know why. In 1816, they did not. They only knew that summer had failed them. The year without a summer was not just a strange historical footnote. It was a demonstration of planetary vulnerability, a reminder that civilization, no matter how advanced, is a sign, are all on stable weather, predictable harvests, and sunlight that arrives on time. In 1816, the sun still rose, but for millions of people watching frost creep across their fields in June, it felt as though the world itself had shifted, and for one cold, haunted year, it had.